Hi there, and welcome to Smith and Sheridan on Biotech, podcast of the science and business of biotechnology, presented by me, Cormac Sheridan.
And me, Andy Smith. Hello, everyone. Hello, Cormac. How are you?
I'm good, Andy. How are you this week?
I'm not too bad, thanks.
Do you think that these are the days of miracle and wonder?
In some ways, yes. In others, no. But tell me what you're thinking.
Two things kind of cropped up of late that I thought were both, if you were kind of a biotech booster, you would be saying these are the days of miracle and wonder. Regeneron Pharmaceuticals, their AAV gene therapy DB Auto for a very particular genetic form of congenital deafness, essentially seems to have cured a young child of their deafness within 24 weeks of administration.
I don't know if cured is the right term, right? Because the child has never heard before. It sounds biblical, doesn't it?
It does. Yeah, it does. And they've just given a healthy copy of this gene encoding a protein, otoferlin, which is involved in the functioning of the sensory hair cells that are involved in the conversion of a mechanical stimulus that results in an electrical signal that gives us the experience of hearing. I mean, it's miraculous stuff. And then, of course, we have the AlphaFold version 3 from Google DeepMind and Isomorphic Labs that's going to tell us even more about the structure of proteins and their interactions with various ligands and interactions between antibodies and allergens. And so it just looks like we're going to sort out every human disease on the planet until we come to this week's topic, allergy.
Yeah.
And it's, pardon the pun, a sort of a long-standing irritant, I think.
Yes.
For the industry as well as the unfortunate individuals who suffer from it. Because I know for some, obviously, it's a kind of a seasonal irritant, grass pollen, allergy, hay fever. It's not pleasant. It's not going to kill you, but it'll maybe make a nice summer's day a less pleasant experience. But for some people, especially with severe food allergies, this is a life and death issue. And it's a kind of a sort of Damocles hanging over.
Yeah, and that's where the interventions are directed. Sure, we've got, sedating and non-sedating antihistamines for those people who get grass pollen and tree pollen and house dust mite pollen allergies that are severe enough for it to affect their quality of life, but not their health otherwise.
Yeah.
But most biotech companies, most pharma companies are at the other end of it, the most severe end of the spectrum, where you can die if you eat a peanut. I mean, that's not quality of life, is it?
It's incredible. And it does happen. It's really, really, really tragic. And obviously with increasing amounts of processed foods and food on the go, and obviously I know people remain as vigilant as possible, but it's very easy for a very, very trace amount of protein from peanut or whatever other food is causing the problem to result in anaphylactic shock and possibly death. This is extraordinarily serious. And it's also a growing problem. And the numbers are kind of big. But I guess the level of severity really varies. But one paper I read, 5% of adults and 8% of children have a food allergy, and the problem is growing quite rapidly. So it's kind of serious stuff. And yet the approaches that we've had, I mean, there's very little out there that's available. There's been a little bit of progress. And interestingly enough, some level of focus coming into play from some of the biotech heavy hitters like Genentech and Regeneron, because it's largely been a sort of an unsexy area of biotech. I think people have felt that the science isn't really well understood. Well, I guess
it could also be that it's quite difficult to sort out the immune system where you have a breaking of tolerance to a particular antigen that you're likely to encounter. So, if you look at all the drugs, which we'll go on to mention, they're directed towards immunosuppression of one form and another. But then, and I've described it, I don't know if you think that's unfair, as a cottage industry. So there are allergists, there are clinic-based, office-based allergists in Europe and the US who have these little concoctions of very dilute allergens that they can test their patients for, and then they can get them to come back every week or month and give them a small dose to build up the tolerance to that antigen. That's been very lightly regulated for years. And one aspect, while companies are developing drugs, is it brings that into a regulatory legitimacy that it didn't have before.
Yeah, because that cottage industry that you're talking about, you could argue that the roots of it go back centuries.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of Samuel Hahnemann, who lived in the 18th and 19th centuries, the so-called founder of homeopathy. Treat alike with like, and all of that. We're certainly not going to go into memory of water or any such concepts here, but that basic principle. And I mean, again, though, the sort of, if you like, the pharmaceutically legitimate history of immunotherapy for allergy is more than 100 years old. And I'm actually going to quote you from the paper. This is Leonard Noon, was in St. Mary's Hospital in London. Paper published in the Lancet, June 1911. Prophylactic inoculation against hay fever. Hay fever is a form of recurrent catarrh affecting certain individuals during the months of May, June, and July, caused by a soluble toxin found in the pollen of grasses. The patients present the idiosyncrasy of being sensitive to this toxin, which is innocuous to normal individuals, etc., etc., etc. And they basically, himself and he worked with John Freeman, they essentially developed a pollen extract which had some efficacy, at least, in relieving the symptoms of hay fever.
If only I'd read that before I went out on my bike earlier today, and I'm now sniffling and stuff, but I don't get it severely to require any medication.
Yeah, and I know operating machinery, if you've taken an antihistamine.
Sedating antihistamine.
Yeah, can't be good for your time trial personal best. But it's fascinating that we haven't really come a long way since. I mean, if you look at say, in the US, the level of FDA approvals just few and far between. Yeah. We had one in 2020.
That's Xolair, isn't it?
No. That was more recently. That was actually only this year, actually.
Oh, well, that's for peanut allergy. I think it was for asthma before then, wasn't it? Yeah. Actually.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Xolair goes right back 2003 for, allergic asthma and all sorts of other systemic allergic conditions like various forms of rhinosinusitis and nasal polyps and things. But in terms of food allergy, got an FDA approval this year for adults and children with IgE-mediated food allergies. And again, the phase 3 trial, they had a really good separation from placebo. 67% of those on the active drug attained the primary endpoint, which was the ability to take 600 milligrams, which isn't even a gram, though. Let's not forget, there's a tiny amount of peanut protein.
I mean, how much, is that one nut or is it half a nut?
I don't know the numbers. I don't measure the weight of my nuts. That sounds somewhat inappropriate, but I don't know. It's a very small amount. But the key thing, though, is that it just means that accidental ingestion, and you still have to maintain, obviously, this vigilance of avoidance, but that you maybe lower the risk for a severe reaction if you accidentally ingest more than you should. And just for completeness, in the placebo arm, 7% of those and the placebo arm attained the primary endpoint. So there's a very, very wide separation.
Xolair does bring us out of the cottage industry era into modern pharmaceuticals because it's a monoclonal antibody directed against IgE.
Yep.
It's not a sledgehammer that breaks an immunological nut like epinephrine or even these antihistamines. It's got a specific target in mind. So we are into the modern era, aren't we?
We are. And also what's nice about it is that it's a generalized mechanism. So there were secondary endpoints on that same trial published in the New England Journal of Medicine. And secondary endpoints were the ability to take cashew nut protein, milk, and egg. And again, there was good separation between active treatment and placebo on those secondary endpoints, ranging from 41% versus 3% response on cashew nut, 66% versus 10% in terms of egg, 67% versus 0%. Sorry, that's egg. I'm misreading it. Milk was 66 and 10%. Anyway, that's all jumbling up the figures too much there for people because it's an addition to, but the only FDA-approved therapeutic has been Palforzia, which has a certain notoriety. This is the Aimmune Therapeutics product, which got approved in 2020, triggered a very big payday for the investors in that company because Nestle bought them out for 2.6 billion. But it was a bit of a flop commercially because it is such a complicated therapy to administer. All you're doing is giving kids, it's usually kids, tiny amounts of the protein every day, but there's this very complicated protocol of introduction, dose escalation, maintenance, and apparently just a lot of people just gave up. And now again, funny enough, the phase 3 data again were published in the New England Journal of Medicine, and it did similar business to Xolair in terms of its separation from placebo. It was 67% of participants on the trial on the active treatment arm attained the primary endpoint. And again, this is based on the ability to take 600 mg of peanut protein, and 4% of those in the placebo arm attained that primary endpoint. So it does work, but it's just, I think a lot of people just decided that they were just going to stick to avoidance and use of the rescue medication, the epinephrine, should the worst comes to the worst, and somebody undergoes anaphylactic shock. And by the way, just for completeness too, Allergens, Greer has acquired the Palforzia business last year for an undisclosed amount. I presume that's not to embarrass the Nestle people. And I think it's a sort of a milestone-based payment structure anyway, or deal structure, so that it obviously depends on what kind of business they generate. But Allergies obviously have been around in the space for a long time.
Yeah.
And then there's another French company.
Remind me, am I right? Do I remember this, that they provide the allergens for clinic-based allergists to do their stuff in tolerizing patients?
As far as I know, I mean, they're one of those names I know very little about them. There's those obscure European specialty pharma companies that aren't terribly interesting or innovative.
Well, I think you're describing the allergy space a bit obscure in terms of medical specialty.
Yeah. But funny enough, there was a company that has a fair lot of momentum behind it a few years ago, and they're still going, and they do have a therapy that does appear to work, but it's just taken forever because they've had any amount of setbacks. This is DBV Technologies with their ViaSkin peanut, and that's the idea is very clever. It was a patch-based therapy. So
I talked to payers in the US, and they say we don't pay for convenience. But if it's younger kids we're talking about, there is an advantage there. I don't know how much you could charge for it than the parental therapies.
Yeah, but they've been beset by all sorts of problems, some of their own making. They were getting partial clinical holds put on them, and their communication to the market was very poor at some points because they had indicated that things were all going well, the next minute they weren't. But
this is the problem with allergy studies, isn't it? Where you're aiming to prevent a patient have an allergic attack by giving them the allergen in the hope that your drug will work. I mean, it's almost tempting fate, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And it does happen. I mean, Palforzia is only administered through a REMS program, a risk evaluation and mitigation, because there is a risk of anaphylaxis.
REMS programs, listeners, are reserved for some of the most toxic medicines or dangerous medicines. Yeah.
Exactly. And DBV, it's case in point, they have another New England Journal of Medicine published phase 3 trial. It obviously is the go-to journal for food allergy trials. And they had treatment-related anaphylaxis occurring in a rate of 1.6% in the active treatment arm and 0% in the control arm. And what's also interesting here, and paper itself didn't really explore this issue, but I was very taken aback, it's because it really sticks out, is that, again, they had 67% response rate in the active treatment arm, but they also had a 33.5% response rate in the placebo arm, which is extraordinary.
We don't understand what's going on with allergies or the immune system. That's what it tells me. And you think when you run clinical trials, you worry about the people who don't respond on active drug. But then, the placebo effect is big, but I'm not sure we're talking about a placebo effect in allergies. But you have to worry about both. For the statistics, absolutely. You have to worry about the patients on active drug that don't respond. And why is it they don't and others do? And then you have to worry about the patients on the placebo that do respond.
I mean, I'm just gobsmacked that sticking a patch on somebody, I don't know whether that kind of triggers some sort of
the power of the mind, Cormac.
Yeah, psychological response. Or does just it couldn't be the fact that the actual patch itself has some sort of immunomodulatory activities, because there are some really little interesting areas, like say in the eye, where you can have a placebo drop of fluid, and that in itself actually can have a very useful therapeutic effect, even if it doesn't have the active drug, Well,
so it's not unknown. I mean, when I worked for Smith Beecham's, we had an advisory panel on the product I was working for, which was a topical antibiotic product. And it had an antibiotic in it, and the gel was just 2 pegs, 2 polyethylene glycols and the antibiotic. And polyethylene glycol has a wound healing effect. So one of the experts on the advisory board said, the placebo seems to work quite well, doesn't it?
Yeah. So, and again, what they're targeting for is infants aged 1 to 3, because Aimmune or Aimmune, actually, their Palforzia treatment is approved only for kids between the ages of 4 and 17. So there is a market there for them if they can convince the FDA that they do have it.
Another interesting point about allergies. The figures you quoted at the beginning, higher in children than in adults. And the old adage is, oh, perhaps she'll grow out of it, or perhaps he'll grow out of it. How do they do that? What's the mechanism behind that?
I do not know. Biological growth, which is not something that a pharmaceutical company can capture, I think. I do not know. And well, we know that the immune system undergoes a process of maturation as well as affinity maturation.
Yeah.
I mean,
this has always been the interesting thing for me about allergies, because in embryonic development, you have this thing called clonal deletion, where somehow the embryo's immune system decides that there are self and non-self antigens. Well, everything is a non-self antigen, apart from the self antigens, right? And these are the tissues in your body. So it works out which ones are the tissues in your body, and it deletes those from the repertoire of antibodies, cell-mediated response, and then the other response. Except that perhaps there are some it doesn't miss out, or is allergy something it actually is? And this is the whole point of tolerizing patients, is to reestablish that tolerance again. So it is almost recognized as a self-antigen, so you don't raise a response to it.
Yeah, we do know that children do often grow out of these issues.
But is that something to do with maturation of the immune system as well, as you were hinting?
It is basically kind of a catch-all, because I don't necessarily have detailed understandings of that, but I presume that obviously a whole lot of processes that happen when one hits
there was a lot of discussion recently about teenagers' brains still developing out at teenagers. Perhaps the immune system of some people is still clonally deleting out to 4 or 5 or something.
And we're still not fully tuned in to understanding how the immune system interacts with other systems in our body.
Yes, but we're making inroads. So we've already mentioned Xolair, which is a very specific intervention in the immune system, downregulating.
That's right.
We've talked about the sedating and non-sedating antihistamines, and we talked about tolerance. But there are other more exciting things happening. You mentioned Regeneron earlier, that again, very specific areas, and I was quite excited about one of those. But Regeneron are doing a number of things in allergies.
Yeah, it's interesting to me that Regeneron is in an area like allergy, because they're obviously a very cutting edge company, and they have plenty going on in the sort of maybe adjacent area of immunological indications, because they're actually in phase 3 with a birch allergy therapy, and it's a cocktail of 3 antibodies targeting apparently a notorious allergen called the BET-V1 allergen. And they've taken 3 because just in some sort of in vitro assay, the 3 were much more effective.
1 doesn't work well enough, 2 works better, but 3 work better. But I mean, in answer to your question, why are Regeneron working in allergies? And I know Lenny, the chief executive, is not going to like me for this, so that's one Christmas card off the list. But Regeneron an antibody company, and when you're an antibody company, every indication looks like something that could be addressed by an antibody, even allergy. But I mean, they seem to be working on it well.
And the other program, which I know was the one that kind of grabbed your attention, is kind of jaw-dropping actually, because they're taking, it's a combination of dupilumab, which is a massive blockbuster
COPD and asthma.
Yeah, and various autoimmune indications. And that's is that a dual interleukin-4 and 13 receptor blocker?
17, is it 13A? Yes, but it is. You're right. They are. Yes, it is.
But they're pairing it with a bispecific antibody that targets B-cell maturation antigen and CD3. So it unleashes a sort of a T-cell response on B-cells that are expressing BCMA antigen.
As you know, I was quite excited about that because it reminded me of the classic immunological phrase of class switching, where you switch the antibodies from an IgE, which is the one that causes the problem with allergies, to an IgG. But it's not. Or if it is if class switching is achieved, it's achieved by deletion of the IgE antibody and leaving the IgG antibody to take up the slack, if you like.
I think what happens is that the dupilumab prevents class switching to IgE, and the linvoseltamab, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, is a transiently dosed thing, and it wipes out all plasma cells. And you're trying to delete IgE-specific plasma cells by leaving the rest intact.
Right. Well, there you go, Lenny. Not for the first time. You're more sophisticated than I gave you credit for.
So it's
or at least your discovery people are more sophisticated.
It's kind of a 1-2 combination, I think, right, as far as from what I can read anyway. And no, it's only phase 1 in a tiny amount of patients. So I'm assuming it's a safety study. It just strikes me as being very heavy therapy, because this is a drug, linvoseltamab, is itself has got an August 22nd PDUFA date for myeloma. So this is a very, very heavy drug.
If we have to worry about anything, if you go too far on suppressing the immune system, you end up with more troubles than you were trying to prevent, or different troubles. So the anti-TNF therapies, right, they have a well-known immunosuppressants for rheumatoid arthritis and many other indications, but they have a black box warning for lymphomas. So if you take the immune system down too far, you actually get suppression of any anti-cancer activity that you natively have.
But I don't think that's necessarily a valid comparison. I mean, I think Xolair is probably a better exemplar, and I think that's got a fairly clean safety record.
I was talking to my wife about this earlier in the week, and we talked about things. You develop drugs and strange things happen, and with Xolair, it's an anti-E directed antibody, so it mops up circulating IgE. But, it's later been found that its effect is much better than you would expected just from the half-life of the antibody alone. So, and we're moving on to prevention rather than EpiPen-like treatment of the case. But because it targets the IgE present on the surface of cells that produce IgE, you get depletion of those cells and you get a prolonged effect. So you get IgE specific, as you're intimating, immunosuppressive effect.
And now, I just checked the Xolair label. There is a black box warning for anaphylaxis, actually.
Really?
Which I wasn't aware of. And I'm assuming it's reasonably well managed, but you obviously have to be very careful when you're initiating dosing. Because I was just thinking that IgE antibodies tend to be known for their protective effects against parasites, which...
Well, we need them, right? I mean, not that I'm going out to eat any uncooked meat or anything like that, but we produce them for a reason.
But at the same time, I do think, though, that our exposure to parasites in wealthy countries, at least, is far less than it was when we evolved in caves or in the African savannah or wherever it was, and obviously had a much more intimate relationship with infectious agents. So, things like venom as well, or toxins from snakes, or so maybe that's why you can get away without having necessarily a fully fledged kind of regiment of IgE
well, there's
antibodies.
An interesting prospect, Cormac. I mean, it's possible that there are people with genes deleted that produce IgE antibodies. I wonder if they don't get allergies.
I don't know whether that, if you had those, I don't know whether those kind of deletions would be viable, would they?
Well, I wouldn't have thought so. Oh, yeah. If anyone knows if there's, at least in mice, a knockout of an IgE, whether it's embryonically lethal, we'd be very interested to know.
Yeah, we should follow up on that. So I think, though, in summary, what we can say is that there's been kind of, the cottage industry sort of almost kind of craft-based approach to treating allergy is, after more than 100 years, starting finally to give way to a bit of molecular medicine. Yeah.
It's being the, in cycling terms, it's a fat bloke at the back of the peloton that's coming along while the key riders are finished. But
and now you're reminding me of Samuel Beckett waiting for Godot. The legend was that Godot was based on a particularly bad rider in the Tour de France. Although if you're in the Tour de France in the first place, you have to be reasonably handy.
Yeah, you're a pretty good rider,
But at a kind of a relative level, he wasn't really delivering the business. So Paul Simon to Samuel Beckett in the space of half an hour. I think that's
with lots of classical immunology on the way.
That's the A to Z of allergy. So I wish you well as you venture forth into the summer on your saddle, and I wish you clean air, healthy lungs, and no more than is necessary an amount of IgE antibodies in your bloodstream to combat any parasites and auxins you may encounter.
Thanks, and Cormac. Goodbye, everyone. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening, folks. Until the next time.